Michael Hastings died the other day. Do you know who Michael Hastings is? A Rolling Stone journalist, and the guy famous for making mainstream media journalists really angry with him. And this is sort of an aside here, so excuse me for going on to the aside, but I will bring it back to the main point. Michael Hastings is the journalist who brought down General McChrystal in the Middle East for revealing things that McChrystal said while everyone was sitting around drinking, and it was supposedly off the record. Mainstream media journalists who were also there were just appalled that this information was released by Hastings. Even after his death, Geraldo Rivera, who shouldn't be called a journalist in any context ever, said, my condolences to Mr. Hastings' family, but let's remember this is the guy who brought down one of America's best fighting generals. I'm sorry. It's a journalist's job to print the kind of news people don't want him to print. And Michael Hastings printed the kind of news that other journalists didn't want him to print.
And we saw it here tonight. General Kimmett, who was a spokesperson in Baghdad, who was a roommate of Petraeus, who was involved in one of the biggest debacles in recent foreign policy history, is on TV, defending David Petraeus without actually addressing the real problems with David Petraeus' record. And those are the fact that he manipulated the White House into escalating to Afghanistan. He ran a campaign in Iraq that was brutally savage, included arming the worst of the worst, Shiite death squads, Sunni militiamen, and then you go back to the training of the Iraqi army program that also had similar problems. So for me, all the while he's going around the country talking about honor and integrity. So for me, the questions of honor and integrity, I was raising those earlier. A number of other journalists who were actually covering David Petraeus were raising those concerns. You might not get that from someone like Barbara Starr at CNN, who essentially is a spokesperson for the Pentagon in many ways.
General Kimmett, I must give you the last word because you started in such a civilized manner and then basically everything you said got trashed. So respond to what Mr. Hastings was saying.
It's simple. To suggest that he was not successful in Iraq belies the facts. I was there 3 days ago. I've been in Baghdad for the last 2 weeks. It is a much different place than it was when David Petraeus took over there. There is calm.
General Kimmett was the spokesperson in 2004, lying to the American people every day.
Okay,
in 2006, he said there was progress in Iraq. I was in Iraq there, man.
Michael,
don't try to spin. You guys are just letting him spin.
Let him have his say, please.
Okay.
Listen, I was over there as a private businessman. I've been going in there for the last 9 years, both in uniform and as a State Department official, and now as a private individual. And to suggest that Iraq today is the same Iraq that David Petraeus saw when he walked in the door just demonstrates that Michael hasn't been there, and unfortunately it doesn't make the story for him, so I can't help him.
I spent more time in Iraq than you have, man. Come on. Let's be honest. David Petraeus fueled an Iraqi civil war that the Shiites won. We installed a radical Islamist government in Iraq. I'm glad the general was able to make money off his service now that he's out there and he can go and get contracts and do business in Iraq. Great. I'm glad American capitalism can at least get something back from the trillions of dollars and thousands of lives wasted.
Okay, well, look, this is drifted into...
And by the way, just as a final note, can I say, it's Veterans Day. My younger brother served, and I have a lot of great friends who are veterans who've always protected me and taken care of me in some pretty bad cases. So my respect to them.
The other day, Glenn Greenwald is on the Meet the Press program with David Gregory, who also impersonates a journalist. And David Gregory said to him, why shouldn't you be prosecuted for releasing secret information? Folks, these are the people who represent the mainstream media, and they loathe the journalists who actually do their jobs. And they loathe them, well, maybe subliminally, they loathe them because they make them look bad. When you're actually releasing the kind of information that you should be releasing and that David Gregory and Geraldo Rivera should be releasing, you make them look bad, so they take shots at you. And the shots they took at Michael Hastings after the McChrystal thing is that he was able to burn sources, which, I've gotten in trouble for burning sources before. But you have to burn sources because the sources, if you don't burn them, are going to have all kinds of information that you should be telling the public, but you won't tell them because you don't want to burn your sources. Burning your sources, by the way, folks, if you don't know what that means being willing to print or broadcast something that will embarrass the people who told you the information so that they will then feed you no more information. I burned a sheriff's source once and got in trouble for that, but the story was huge. It was malfeasance, in my little burg here of major proportions. But I got in trouble because now the sheriff's not going to talk to us anymore. Good going, Dan. So there's always that question about, burning sources. And these journalists in the Middle East were so mad at Hastings because they said he was like a carpetbagger journalist who came in, didn't have to cultivate these sources over the long term, could burn General McChrystal, then walk out and go cover other things. Meanwhile, all these journalists who'd been cultivating McChrystal as a source were now going to have their access shut down because Hastings didn't just burn the source, but burned the source and was able to profit and make a bigger name for himself by doing so when these other media journalists weren't able to do that. So they got their source shut off from them and weren't able to make a big, heyday out of it and help their careers and everything else. So these people make enemies, which is what journalists do. Understand something, though, and many of you already do. If you do journalism right, it is an extremely dangerous pursuit. Journalists die all over the world all the time, and they don't die from natural causes. I mean, you look at, well, first of all, Mexico's a disaster. One day we should do a whole show on Mexico. And I get, remember, this podcast stuff is international. And I hear from Mexican nationals all the time saying, when are you going to talk about Mexico, Dan? It's a disaster. And if you're a journalist in Mexico, it's maybe the most dangerous place right now in the world to report accurately. But even in, so-called major global powers like Russia, being a journalist, if you really do your job like a Glenn Greenwald or a Jeremy Scahill or Taibbi or Michael Hastings up until the other day, stand a very good chance of being killed, okay? And so when Hastings died the other day in a car crash, a one-person car crash at 4:30 in the morning, and he crashed at a place where all Angelinos, people from Los Angeles like yours truly, know very well, Highland and Melrose, right around there. If you're going 100 miles per hour on Highland and Melrose, it doesn't matter if it's 4:30 in the morning, that's suicidal. And anyone, like I said, from LA knows this. So there have been a lot of questions and quite a lot of conspiracy over, was Michael Hastings somehow treated by our government the way the Russian government treats their investigative journalists? Hastings supposedly got in touch with the people at WikiLeaks before he died, said he was under FBI surveillance, contacted his sources and said that he's under FBI surveillance, working on a very big story. He's got to go dark for a while. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, folks, is that this Michael Hastings thing has prompted all sorts of conspiracy talk about, was he killed by our government? And not talk from the normal conspiracy outlets, but a lot of Americans saying, was he killed by our government? Now, meditate on this for a second, folks. I am not a conspiracy theorist, and I don't believe Michael Hastings was killed by our government. I always go the Occam's razor route on these things, and I assume it was what it looks like. And I imagine we'll find out something that explains why this crash happened. But that doesn't mean it wasn't some sort of a conspiracy. But the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that so many people are willing to buy that now is a sign of how far we've come down this road. The government is charging Edward Snowden, this whistleblower, who's now fleeing from country to country, trying to find a place that he can escape the wrath of our government they're charging him with espionage. But the main thing Snowden did was tell us what our government is doing. If you get charged with spying for your enemies, when the information is principally released to us, what does that say about the adversarial relationship between the American people and the American government? Again, it's a little bit like the kind of adversarial relationship a journalist is supposed to have with his government. And if you're one of those Americans who think it's even possible that Michael Hastings was offed by the government, that shows you where things have gone, ladies and gentlemen.